All right, in today's episode, we're going to talk about how you can effectively manage a business partnership. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Managing a business partnership is one of the hardest things you can do. And I don't mean to scare you, but there's a reason why so many business partnerships fail, and there's a reason why so many people are solopreneurs, right? If you look at it statistically speaking, there's far more people in business for themselves than people that enter into partnerships in the startup space. So it's very challenging. There's a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of things that come into play. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I want to talk about the major things that I see, the things that I've experienced. I've had several failed business partnerships, stuff that's caused me to not have personal relationships that were amazing ones, including one with my own brother, where we didn't speak for 2 years as a result of a business engagement. So it's caused me great affliction and great pain in my own life. And so hopefully with this, you can avoid this altogether, or you can figure out and go back and work with your business partner on how you guys can navigate these terrains and how you guys can build a more effective, open lines of communication type relationship and a positive, healthy dynamic so that your business can grow and you guys are always on the same page. So the first thing let's talk about is start with defined expectations, right? So here's the thing. I get you're excited about going into this thing together. I get that when things started out, it was like, yeah, we're going to do this. And you only think about the exciting parts of it. You only think about the positives. That's very normal, especially for entrepreneurs, because we're just naturally optimistic. We see these things as they could exist like it's already happened, right? And so sometimes what ends up happening is you just jump into it because it makes sense, right? This person believes in what you're doing. Maybe you had the idea. Maybe you had the idea together. Whatever the case may be, usually it's all surrounding only the things that could go well. And what people often do is they take the relationship for granted. This is particularly true for people that are good friends or family members. In my situation with my brother, I thought, well, he's my brother. He's always going to be my brother, right? So we jumped into it and didn't define these expectations, didn't have these contingency plans or these what-if scenarios in place. It was just, we're brothers and everything's going to be cool, right? So you need to define the expectations up front. And if you do have a close personal relationship, you need to go even a step further, because now you have multiple dynamics that you're dealing with. They're going to bleed into one another no matter how hard you try. They're going to have intersectionality. So things like who's going to have final decision-making power, right? How are you going to make decisions when you're split on what to do? Who's going to be controlling what? Who's going to be doing what, right? Oftentimes what happens is people go in and one partner's upset with the other or vice versa because they're not carrying their weight or doing what it is that they expected that person was going to be doing. When in reality, those things weren't set aside, right? They didn't have something written down that said, these are the things you're going to work on. These are how many hours you're going to contribute. This is the areas that you're going to be focused on in the business. And these are all things that you need to have defined beforehand before you just jump into it and realize that you're working 50 hours and your partner liked the idea of being an entrepreneur but didn't really want to do what it took to actually make this thing a success. So I see that very, very, very often, and it starts with, before you get started, slow down. If you're already in a situation right now where you're in a partnership and things aren't going well, go back and rehash these things, have that conversation to redefine what those expectations should look like, and hopefully what you can do is going forward, you have a more positive working relationship. Or if you haven't started yet, you start off on the right foot and you don't have to have some of these really painful conversations when now it's awkward and weird, right? Because you didn't have those beforehand. Trust me when I tell you, it's more awkward and weird on the back end than you think it's going to be awkward and weird on the front end. Just doing it and saying, you know what? I get this sucks, right? But we're choosing to go into business together. We are bleeding those into those lines of our personal versus our business working relationship. I've often found that people that I don't have a personal relationship prior to doing business with, like, it's not as complicated. It's not as complex. That doesn't give you an excuse to not do these things because you still need to have defined expectations. So there's a startup equity calendar or calculator. I'm sorry. And I'm going to drop that link below so you can check it out. It's like startup calculator or startups or no, I'm sorry. It's founders.com, I think. Anyways, I'm going to drop that below so you can check that out. But this is really good in terms of establishing who's going to be doing what and also how much equity. So this is another thing that I get, and this is still part of defining expectations. But one of the other things that I see often is people jump in and they just say 50-50 split, right? And the reality of that is that it wasn't realistic, right? Is that the other person, maybe they're only willing to do 10% of the work, and thus they should only get 10% of the equity, right? So that's usually a thing, is you got half of my company and I'm doing way more than half the work, right? So define who's bringing what to the business, sit down and iron those things out, and then you'll also know, here are the things that we committed you would do for this equity, right? So then what you're going to do is you're going to take that, and this leads into the next step, is define your own expectations, do the equity calculator, right? So you know who should have what, and what those functions are going to look like, meaning what they're going to be doing in the business or what you're going to yourself are going to be doing in the business. Take it to an attorney. I know right now you're trying to keep skinny and you don't want to have a lot of overhead and a lot of expenditures, but getting things finalized with an attorney is the most important thing that you can do, because it's going to protect you guys, and it's also going to give you something on the back end that, hey, if this thing doesn't work out, here's what's going to happen. Here's how we're going to dilute your shares, or how we're going to reappropriate your shares, or whatever it's going to look like, how this person is going to have an exit from the business contingent upon how much revenue you've generated. You need to have that in place. That person is also going to serve somewhat as an intermediary, so they can help you have these hard conversations that you don't have to maybe instigate yourself, right, or prompt yourself. Having an attorney bring those things up, they're going to give you the hard truths about your situation, maybe the conversations that you've been wanting to have and just haven't had, or that you think you need to have, but it'd be weird to approach that person. An attorney's just going to hit you like it is. So they kind of serve as that third person intermediary to have those tough conversations for you. All right, so consider a trial period, right? So maybe you go into it and say, you know what? Let's not make anything official. Let's not make anything formal. Let's just try 6 months. We're going to tell an attorney, like, hey, we're going to try this thing out. We'll see what happens after 6 months, and then we'll kind of formalize things, right? So I know a lot of people that don't want to go to an attorney because they're like, dude, I don't even know if this thing's going to work. I get that, right? So another reason for you to consider a trial period where you guys are just doing this as a side thing, or you're just kind of kicking it around. Maybe you're doing some market research, stuff like that. What I see a lot of people making the mistake of doing is they go out, spend thousands of dollars, they pay for a URL that costs them $4,000 that they had no business in buying, or they go trademark something, they hire an attorney, they pay him a ton of money, they do all these various things that I recommend you do, right? And then they realize, like, hey, we just suck at working together, right? Like, this isn't what we thought it was going to be, and now the money went down the drain, right? And then it's like, I got to recoup this, or I got to feel like I'm going to make something positive because I spent all this money, and so on and so forth. So give yourself, a 90 to 120 day, maybe even a 6-month trial period of what's this going to look like working with this person, especially if you've never worked together before. So I do this with hires, with new hires as well. 90-day probationary period before we know if you're going to be a full-time member of the team, right? Because you're going to see pretty quickly the type of person that this partner is going to be and the type of partner that they're going to be in the business. So it's really, really important, I think, to go ahead and give yourself that 6 months, 90 days to 6 month time frame of like, let's kind of see how things go, right? And you might say at the end of it, look, there's no way in hell I'm getting into bed as an equity partner with this person, right? And remember this too, speaking about attorneys and what have you, and speaking about partnerships, it is harder to dissolve a partnership in many cases, to resolve a partnership gone awry. It is harder to do that than to literally get a divorce. Like, for real, it is that difficult, because specifically if you start to make money, then it gets really tricky and it can get really ugly, and litigation happens and gets very, very expensive. So another reason, right? Avoid the headache, avoid all of those other things. Don't let it go forever. Don't have a 3-year trial period, but I think a short trial period is something you could do that is extremely, extremely beneficial. All right, next. So you need to have, and this kind of ties into expectations and defining what things are going to look like, but you need to have an established time, A, and lines of communication, B, for how you're going to discuss issues. So a lot of times what ends up happening is partners will bring something up in the heat of the moment. So there's something they don't agree on, maybe there's some stressors going on and things that then need to be dealt with. What they do is they bring it up right there in the moment. And it just causes this massive thing that was just totally unnecessary, it just wasn't brought up at the right time, right? Or they are a little bit more passive about it and they just don't bring it up at all until it boils over with so many other things that they just kind of explode, right? And it's just like, whoa, like, where's this coming from? And you kind of look like a crazy person if you blow up, although it was warranted because things weren't addressed over time. So I would recommend every single week have the opportunity to have those lines of communication, but also give yourself a time in line with that to discuss, like, hey, what's going on in the business that you'd like to address with me? What's going on that you're upset about? Did I do anything? What's it been like on the other side of me to be my business partner, right? And have those conversations and be willing. And that way you're mentally prepared to hear things that maybe aren't going to be pleasant to hear, but you're prepared for that. It didn't catch you off guard while you're in the middle of something really stressful. So maybe that's how you end your week. I recommend everybody start the beginning of the week and close your week with meetings, right? And I'm not a big fan of meetings, all right? So I don't want you to spend weeks and weeks and weeks, or I don't want to spend hours of the day having meetings. But a quick 15-minute check-in on Monday and a quick 15-minute post-mortem at the end of your week, I think, is extremely healthy. And if it stretches to 30 minutes because there's something serious going on and you guys need to address that, I think it's very, very fruitful of you to do so and have those opportunities and make intention for those opportunities to happen where you can discuss the issues that both of you are experiencing in the partnership. All right, so I talked about intermediary before with an attorney. So I don't think you should call your attorney every single time that there's a dispute. That's only when things get really bad and when you're setting things on the front end. But your attorney is probably not going to be inclined or even want to have conversations with you on an ongoing basis about decisions to be made in the business, right? So about those things, what you're going to want to do is have advisors in place, right? Even if you're a small business and you're only making, $30,000 to $50,000 a year, or even less than that as in a partnership, I would find somebody that you trust, find somebody that you both can mutually agree upon that's going to serve in an advisory capacity. Not a formal thing where you have to go, give them equity in the business and, have a board and all that. Like you're probably too early for that. Maybe you're not. And if you aren't, then you probably should have that. But usually if you're smaller, it's unnecessary to have it like a real formal thing. So maybe what you do is you find somebody that can, jump in, once a quarter. Maybe they have some startup experience, or it's somebody that you kind of have modeled, or maybe the reason you got into entrepreneurship to begin with. Don't go to mom and dad or the next door neighbor, right? You need to find somebody maybe that is, I would reach a little bit, right? I wouldn't just find the lowest hanging fruit to have somebody as an advisor, but you also don't want to, not have one because you want Elon Musk to be your advisor, and obviously that's not going to happen, right? So unless you have something that I'm not aware of. But having an advisor serves as a really, really, really amazing way to have that third party. Guys, I know you voted opposite of each other. This is what I think, and maybe they provide you. Obviously, you need to be the final decision maker, right? So you being the person that has majority equity, which you're going to find out with the equity calculator. But if the advisor votes in favor of your decision or against it, you might, being the final decision maker, or if your partner is the final decision maker, that gives you the permission to make that tough decision when there is a split decision, so to speak. So really, really good thing to do, particularly as it relates to direction of the company, especially if there's a pivot involved or there's some kind of new initiative that you're trying to launch that you don't see eye to eye on. Maybe if you're more entrepreneurial and maybe your partner's not, maybe they're more of an implementer and you're more of the visionary. That was my situation. My brother was not as much of an entrepreneur as I am in terms of the way he thought. I'm very much a visionary, and it was hard for him sometimes to grasp what it is that I was foreseeing, because in my mind it already existed. But to him, not being able to tangibly see it, it was difficult for him to kind of grasp that. So we were always at odds about that. Having advisors to come in and say, hey, you know what, I see where he's going. This is a great thing. And maybe they could further explain it to the person that's not the entrepreneur, if you're that person or if your partner's that person, and they say, okay, that makes sense. I get that, right? And so it kind of takes a little bit of pressure off of you having to have those really tough conversations all the time by having those people that can kind of help push things in the right direction. All right, so celebrate wins together. So this is the last one. And this is really important because in a partnership, specifically if you're growing, what can end up happening is you're kind of only focused on the stressful stuff, on the things you should be doing. The wheels are churning and churning and churning, right? And so it's easy to get in the routine, in the habit of just checking out, going home, and doing your own thing, personal life, and then coming back. And so what ends up happening is you don't grow as a partner, as a partnership. You guys don't take the opportunity. Now, I'm not saying go out every afternoon to happy hour. That's not what I'm saying, because you got work to do, and I get that, right? But if you guys make a pact that every time something really positive happens in the business, you're going to do something to celebrate together, right? So the reason I say together is most times what happens is somebody will go home and they celebrate with their family and they celebrate exclusively. So particularly if things have gotten bad, right? If things start to go sour, then they just don't want to deal with each other, right? It's just like staying in a toxic relationship. So One of the ways to prevent that from happening is to keep the mission in sight, right? To keep the why in sight. Why are we doing this? And then celebrate when those things have happened in a positive direction, right? So very, very important. You're going to have a lot of things you don't disagree on. You're going to have a lot of things that come up where it's like, oh, it's like this sucks and I got to deal with this person. So really, really embrace and celebrate when things do go right, because that's going to keep you motivated moving forward. And it's going to make it feel like, hey, you know what? I know we butt heads and I know we sometimes have our differences and I know we're completely different people, but man, this thing really works. And take the opportunity too, in line with celebrating together, to recognize those people, right? Recognize that other person, or have them take the opportunity to recognize you for the wonderful things that you've done, or, you know, kind of celebrate each other as well for the work that you've done. And the reason why this thing worked is because of your efforts, is because of the things that you did, if that is indeed the case. So really, really take advantage of those opportunities to do that. And I think you'll see things turn in a very positive direction, or start off in a really positive one if you haven't gotten started just yet. Guys, if you like this video, make sure to like it and subscribe. I'm dropping weekly with stuff like this, as well as conversations that I have on my podcast, Entrepreneur Hour Podcast, which we do have video version of here on Entrepreneur Hour TV that you can watch or listen, contingent upon whatever you'd like to do. But if this isn't for you and you know somebody that's in a partnership that's really having a tough time right now, make sure to share it. Make sure to share it with them and let them know, like, hey, this thing might help you. I know you've been struggling with this, and this might help you, right? Maybe you stumbled upon this because you're trying to help them out. So there's a ton of resources below. I've got a burnout quiz. If you're in the middle of burnout, you can take it. It's 100% free. Various programs, you can take a 50% off to my book club for entrepreneurs. So a lot of stuff below. Make sure you check out the description. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and subscribe for more videos here on the YouTube channel. And I will see you guys in the next one.